Hi folks, I'm Radical Russ Belville from The Russ Belville Show at radicalruss.com, and I'm urging you to vote yes on Washington State Initiative 502 to legalize marijuana. Now, I just received a video from my friends at theweedblog.com coming from the no on I-502 camp. So here's the latest from the marijuana smokers who are voting against legalization in Washington State. I will help translate for people who may be frightened by this propaganda. On November 6th, you will be asked to vote on Initiative 502. For the first time in Washington history, you get a chance to vote to legalize marijuana. They'll tell you that I-502 would not legalize cannabis? Really? Then what is that part that says, the possession by a person 21 years of age or older of usable marijuana or marijuana-infused products in amounts that do not exceed those set forth in Section 15, Paragraph 3 of this Act is not a violation of this section, this chapter, or any other provision of Washington state law. What does that mean, if not legalizing cannabis? Well, they will tell you that it does not remove or alter the criminal penalties that make cannabis illegal. Well, right. Penalties for the possession of marijuana will still remain, except for that whole not a violation of Washington state law part for possessing personal amounts of marijuana. They like to tell you that I-502 will continue this state's declaration that cannabis is equal to heroin in danger and illegality. And that's true. The Schedule 1 status of marijuana, declaring it to be equal in danger and illegality to heroin, will remain. Except unlike heroin, it will not be a violation of Washington state law to possess a personal amount of marijuana. Now, they will tell you that instead of legalization, I-502 will set up a narrow exception for certain criminal activities, such as the possession of a small amount. Yes, exactly. Possession of an ounce of bud, a pound of edibles, or a 6-pack of infused liquids will not be a violation of Washington state law. And growing, processing, and selling marijuana with a commercial license will be legal too. They want to scare you by saying, however, gifting or sharing, such as passing a joint, will remain a felony charge. Yes, it will. And if you can find a single Washingtonian who has ever been charged with a felony for passing a joint, you can tell them they're at just as much risk for prosecution after 502 as before 502. They want to scare you by saying I-502 makes it easy for the prosecution of individuals for impairment simply for having consumed a substance days or even weeks ago. Yeah. If by easy you mean an individual had to get into a car, broke a traffic law, got pulled over by a cop, exhibited visible signs of impairment, failed a roadside sobriety test, was arrested by a cop, was taken to the station, passed a breathalyzer test, was then taken to the hospital, had their blood drawn, was then found to have greater than 5 nanograms of active impairing THC in their system, had a prosecutor then file DUID charges, then had their defense attorney fail to prevent admission of the blood test into evidence through improper police or testing procedures, and failed to convince a jury that his driving was unimpaired despite a jury instruction from the judge that 5 nanograms or greater equals impairment. So yeah, sure, if you call all of that easy, which is the standards they need now to be able to arrest you and take their blood. They continue by saying that they are firmly against impaired driving. However, the policies in I-502 have nothing to do with impaired driving. Right. They have to do with irresponsible driving. DUID does not stand for driving under the impairment of drugs. It's driving under the influence of drugs. If you have 5 nanograms of active THC in your bloodstream, you are under the influence of drugs. Science to date shows 5 nanograms of active THC are associated with increased risk of accidents. Now, they'll try to confuse you by saying I-502 would make it legal to possess 1 legal ounce, but possessing your legal ounce will give police the right to test your blood and prosecute you for a DUID. Which is confusing to me because didn't they just open up this video by saying I-502 wouldn't legalize cannabis? Regardless, 502 does not change the standard that cops need to arrest you for a DUID, which is what they have to do before they can test your blood. Possession of marijuana under an ounce is not a violation of Washington state law and in no way represents a probable cause to arrest you for a DUID. They also want to say that I-502 would mandate a zero tolerance policy for drivers under 21. The standard for guilt would be any detectable amount. But I-502 legalizes marijuana for adults over age 21, so people under age 21 should not have detectable marijuana in their systems. If we're going to treat marijuana like alcohol, understand that Washington state has a 0.02 blood alcohol content for drivers under age 21, which is essentially zero tolerance for anything outside of mouthwash alcohol or medicine alcohol. They claim that the bill would unfairly target medical marijuana patients and that individuals who use marijuana medicinally will have a higher tolerance to THC. Well, the science has weighed in on this. Dr. Erin Karchner and her colleagues studied 25 marijuana smokers in their mid-20s who started smoking pot at an average age of 16 years old. These people used marijuana on average 12 out of the 14 days in amounts from a few grams to an ounce a day. Then Dr. Karchner monitored their abstinence from pot for a week. Only one of the participants was above 5 nanograms after a day of non-smoking. The next highest level was 2 nanograms. After day 2, nobody tested above 5 nanograms. So much for the prosecution of individuals for impairment simply for having consumed a substance days or even weeks ago being true. They also claim that many will not be impaired at all when they have the amounts above the legal limit of 5 nanograms in their systems, which is true, just as many alcoholics can drive just fine above a 0.08 BAC. The question then is, if they are not impaired at all, what are they doing to convince a cop to pull them over and claim to see visible evidence of impairment? For if a driver is suspected of impairment now, arrested now, blood tested now, and it comes back at 5 nanograms or more now, the driver is going to get a DUID conviction now. But on top of that, now he can also get a possession of marijuana misdemeanor. They also claim that this is not the way to reform our cannabis policies or stop the dangerous consequences of prohibition. Really? Well, then what would be the way? Because to me, it seems filing an initiative, lining up millions of dollars in campaign contributions, and enlisting the high-profile support of members of the community, including law enforcement, government, entertainment, and all the major drug law reform organizations, seems to me the way to reform our cannabis policies. But they will say they're simply not willing to implement dangerous new policies in exchange for faulty reform disguised as legalization. Well, we're simply not willing to allow a tiny minority of those who profit from prohibition pot prices and writing doctors' permission slips for medical marijuana to scare the vast majority of marijuana consumers into voting to continue marijuana prohibition. They say the new approach is the wrong approach. I say the right approach is the one you actually have a chance of voting for. Please vote yes on I-502 and begin the ending of adult global marijuana prohibition. And you know, of course, this video was paid for by I-502.org, also known as the only organized, funded, and registered political action committee against marijuana legalization in Washington, run by a medical marijuana profiteer. And as a postscript, the video cites sensiblewashington.org as its source for all this information, also known as the people who keep promising year after year to completely repeal all marijuana laws in Washington, yet never have collected even half the signatures they need to make the ballot, nor have ever raised any serious campaign money, nor have ever raised any high-profile endorsements, but think they can do it in 2013, an off election year, and presuming they can pass this incredibly liberal initiative statewide after the state supposedly rejects the far more conservative I-502. Calling this sensible only heightens the irony of pot smokers voting against ending their own criminality. I'm Radical Russ Belville from The Russ Belville Show. Check us out at radicalruss.com, theweedblog.com, and pot.tv. And please, Be sensible. Vote yes on I-502.